July 7th, 1520. On the plains of Otumba, near a modern-day Mexico City, a handful of survivors are on the verge of being wiped out. They are a battered group of about 450 Spanish conquistadors, with a few hundred of their indigenous Tlaxcalan allies still by their side. They're wounded, starving, and exhausted after a week-long fighting retreat. Before them, stretching across the valley, is a vast, fresh, and confident Aztec army. While the exact numbers are debated, estimates place their numbers anywhere from 10,000 to 20,000 warriors, a force brought together for one reason: to erase the foreign invaders from their lands. The Spaniards are surrounded, vastly outnumbered, and there is nowhere left to run. For all intents and purposes, this is a death sentence. So, how did this desperate band of soldiers not only survive, but pull off one of the most improbable victories in military history? How did so few men escape a perfectly laid trap and defy an army of thousands? The answer isn't just their steel weapons or the handful of horses they had left. It lies in a fundamental clash of cultures, a shrewd understanding of their enemy's mindset, and a single, desperate, all-or-nothing gamble that would change the fate of an empire. To understand how the Spanish got here, on the brink of total destruction, and how they snatched victory from the jaws of certain death, we have to go back 7 disastrous days to a night of blood, gold, and terror, known as La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. Our story starts in the heart of the Aztec Empire, the magnificent island city of Tenochtitlan. In November 1519, Hernán Cortés had led his small army into the capital, a marvel of engineering that was unlike anything the Europeans had ever seen. They were welcomed at first by the Aztec Emperor, Moctezuma II. Whether out of caution, curiosity, or fear, we'll never know. But this welcome was a fragile one. The Spaniards, guests in a city of hundreds of thousands, quickly turned their lodgings into a fortress and, in an incredibly bold move, took Moctezuma himself hostage, making him a prisoner in his own palace. For months, a tense peace held. Cortés governed the empire through his captive emperor, while his men helped themselves to the city's vast treasures. But the situation was a powder keg. The spark came when Cortés had to leave the city to deal with a rival Spanish expedition that had landed on the coast to arrest him for insubordination. Cortés left his trusted but notoriously hot-headed lieutenant, Pedro de Alvarado, in charge of about 120 soldiers. It was a fatal mistake. Alvarado, fearing a plot, made a brutal preemptive strike. During the festival of Toxcatl, as thousands of Aztec nobles and priests danced unarmed in the main temple courtyard, Alvarado ordered a massacre. His soldiers sealed the exits and slaughtered the unsuspecting elites. The city erupted. When Cortés returned to Tenochtitlan, having defeated the rival force and convinced its soldiers to join him, he wasn't walking into a city he controlled. He was walking into a death trap. The entire population was in open revolt, and the Spaniards were besieged in their palace. The Aztecs, who had once hesitated, were now united by a burning rage. They elected a new, aggressive emperor, Cuitlahuac, and the streets became a war zone. Cortés tried to use Moctezuma to calm the crowds, but the emperor's authority was gone. He was struck down and killed, though accounts differ on whether it was by the hands of his own people or the Spanish. With their puppet emperor dead and supplies running out, Cortés knew there was only one option left: escape. On the rainy night of June 30th, 1520, the Spanish made their desperate run for it. This was La Noche Triste. Their plan was to sneak out across one of the city's causeways, the narrow roads connecting the island capital to the mainland. They even built a portable bridge to cross the gaps the Aztecs had opened. But stealth was impossible. As they moved through the city, they were discovered. War drums thundered, and the night exploded with battle cries. Aztec warriors swarmed them from all sides. Canoes filled the lake, raining down arrows and javelins, while warriors attacked them on the causeway itself. The retreat became a horrific, chaotic slaughter. The portable bridge got stuck, creating a bottleneck of death. Men, weighed down by the gold they'd greedily stuffed into their armor, were pushed or fell into the lake and drowned. Horses slipped on the wet causeway and were butchered. The narrow path was choked with bodies, equipment, and treasure. The scale of the disaster was clear by sunrise. The losses were staggering. While numbers vary across sources, it's estimated that somewhere between 450 and 800 Spaniards were killed, along with thousands of their crucial Tlaxcalan allies. They lost all their cannons, most of their gunpowder, and nearly all the plundered gold. What was left of the army was a bleeding, demoralized remnant. Hernán Cortés, the man who had gambled everything, sat beneath a tree and wept. But their ordeal wasn't over. The new Aztec Emperor, Cuitlahuac, was determined not to let a single one escape and sent his armies in relentless pursuit. For a week, the survivors limped toward the safety of their allied territory, Tlaxcala, harried at every turn and driven toward a final decisive confrontation, a confrontation that would come on the plains of Otumba. After a grueling retreat, the ragged column of Spaniards and Tlaxcalans crested a hill overlooking the Otumba Valley. What they saw must have frozen the blood in their veins. Spread before them was a colossal Aztec army, a sea of warriors in white cotton armor, their banners rippling in the wind. This was no militia. This was the might of the Aztec Triple Alliance, led by the Tzihua Matlatzincatzin, one of the highest-ranking officials in the empire. The Aztecs had chosen their ground perfectly. The open plain was ideal for their style of warfare, which relied on overwhelming opponents with sheer numbers. Their plan was simple: surround the exhausted invaders and crush them. For the Spaniards, this was the end of the line. There was no retreat. Surrender meant being sacrificed atop a pyramid in Tenochtitlan. Every soldier knew this wasn't a battle for victory, but for survival. They formed a defensive square, a hedgehog of pikes and swords, and braced for impact. The battle began with a deafening roar as thousands of Aztec warriors surged forward. The fighting was a brutal, close-quarters melee. Spanish steel swords were far superior to the obsidian-edged clubs of the Aztecs, but for every warrior they cut down, 10 more seemed to take his place. The few cavalry they had left, perhaps 20 horsemen, were their greatest asset. They charged into the dense ranks, breaking formations and creating chaos, but they were too few to win the battle outright. For hours, the Spaniards and their Tlaxcalan allies held their ground, a tiny island in an ocean of enemies. They were being worn down, and it seemed only a matter of time before their formation would break and they'd be overwhelmed completely. It was in this moment of desperation that Hernán Cortés, his tactical genius sharpened by the certainty of death, spotted something. Across the battlefield, he saw the Aztec command center, and in the middle of it was the commander himself, Matlatzincatzin. He was unmistakable, adorned with a spectacular feathered headdress, brilliant armor, and, most importantly, carrying the army's battle standard. Cortés understood something fundamental about Aztec warfare. It was highly ritualized and centered on its leadership. The commander and his standard weren't just symbols. They were the central nervous system of the entire force. To capture the standard and kill the commander was to decapitate the army. It wasn't about killing soldiers. It was about breaking their will to fight. He knew what he had to do. It was a reckless, almost suicidal gamble, but it was their only chance. Gathering his most skilled captains, men like Pedro de Alvarado, Gonzalo de Sandoval, and Juan de Salamanca, Cortés pointed toward the Aztec general and gave a simple order: charge. With a cry of "Santiago!" the small group of horsemen spurred their exhausted mounts into a flying wedge aimed at the heart of the Aztec army. They crashed through the ranks of warriors, who were stunned by the sudden, focused assault. The charge was a blur of steel, horseflesh, and desperation. They fought their way directly to Matlatzincatzin's position. Cortés surged forward and struck the Aztec general, knocking him from his litter. As the commander fell, a conquistador named Juan de Salamanca delivered the killing blow and seized the battle standard, thrusting it into Cortés's hand. Now, this account comes straight from the Spanish chronicles, and some modern historians suspect it might have been embellished for dramatic effect. But what happened next is undeniable. As their leader fell and they saw their sacred standard in enemy hands, a wave of shock and panic ripped through the Aztec army. The rigid command structure that was their strength now became their fatal weakness. Without their leader, their morale shattered. The ferocious, disciplined army that had been on the verge of victory dissolved into a terrified mob and began to flee. Sensing the shift, the Spanish and their Tlaxcalan allies surged forward, turning a battle for survival into a rout. The Aztecs, who had come to annihilate them, were now scattered and broken. The Battle of Otumba was over. Against all imaginable odds, the battered, outnumbered Spaniards had survived. The path to their allies in Tlaxcala was now clear. The victory was more than a military triumph. It was a psychological resurrection. It proved to their Tlaxcalan allies that the Spanish were still formidable partners in the war against the Aztec Empire. It gave Cortés and his men the breathing room they desperately needed to rest, heal, and resupply. This was the critical turning point. Without Otumba, the Spanish conquest of Mexico would have ended right there. Instead, it allowed Cortés to rally, gather a new army of indigenous allies who opposed Aztec rule, and return a year later to lay siege to Tenochtitlan, this time for good. So how did a few hundred Spaniards survive an army of thousands? They survived because of their desperation, superior steel weapons, and the shock value of their cavalry. But most of all, they survived because of one brilliant, desperate strategy. Hernán Cortés didn't defeat an entire army that day. He defeated one man, the one who mattered most. In doing so, he shattered the spirit of thousands and snatched an impossible victory that paved the way for the fall of the Aztec Empire. The Battle of Otumba is an incredible story of survival, but it's just one chapter in the dramatic and often tragic saga of the Spanish conquest. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more epic historical tales. We'd love to know what you think, so drop a comment below. What other impossible battles of history do you want to see us cover next? Your suggestions help us decide what to create. Thanks for watching.